everybody. Welcome to the Hallmarkies podcast. And today we are talking with another author. We love talking with authors. And we have author Patricia Leavy, the new book, After the Red Carpet. And Patricia, thank you so much for coming on the podcast.
Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah. So what we like to do, this is your first time on the podcast. So I'd like to give you a chance, introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about how you got inspired to become a writer.
Well, I've loved writing since I was a little girl. Some of my first memories are of my grandmother telling me stories and writing my own stories. And my mother recently found some of the earliest books I made.
Oh, nice.
So one is a story that I paid an adult my 25-cent allowance to type it for me. Because I couldn't write yet. They typed it, I illustrated it, and I bound it with a piece of old wallpaper and glue. And
Aw.
my mother recently found it saved in a Ziploc storage bag, and on the back it says that I was 6 years old. So it is fair to say that I really wanted to do this my entire life. I've always loved writing and storytelling more than anything. Although, to be honest, I really wasn't brave enough when I was younger to pursue writing as a career.
Uh-huh.
I think that artists have to be really brave and courageous. It's difficult to put your work out there. And there's just no question about it. You open yourself up to rejection and critique. It's a part of it. And my younger self just could not imagine dealing with that. I was very, very shy. I was bullied when I was young, and I just couldn't imagine choosing that path. So I sort of always wrote creatively on the side for myself, and I pursued a totally different career. I got a PhD in sociology. I became a sociology professor, which I did actually love, and I love teaching. And I started publishing nonfiction. So I was publishing articles, eventually books. And I just I couldn't let go of this feeling that this wasn't necessarily what I should be writing and this wasn't my purpose. And so I started sort of dabbling in my nonfiction work, being more creative and writing in more creative, artistic ways. And eventually I wrote my first novel, which honestly, I didn't tell anyone about at the time, except my boyfriend at the time, who's now my husband.
Uh-huh.
And one of the reasons he's my husband is because he read the first 20 pages and was like, you should write a novel.
Aw.
And I did. And actually I told my mother that day that I was going to marry him one day, and I did.
Aw.
So we'll be celebrating our 15th anniversary this coming May.
Congratulations. That's so
Thank
cute.
Thank you. So I wrote my first novel. I didn't know if I'd publish it. I did publish it. This is back in around 2011. And I just never looked back, and I just kept writing. And that first novel was women's fiction. And the novels that followed, my early novels, they were all women's fiction, but they were sort of all different genres. I was dabbling. But what I loved my whole life was romance. I'm in love with love. I'm definitely that person. I don't know why I didn't start with my passion. I guess I had worked my way up to it, but eventually I did, and I started writing romance novels, and I knew immediately this is my calling, this is my purpose, and I've never looked back.
Yeah. So I'm fascinated by this. So when you said you were six, you sought out somebody to type out your book that you'd written?
Yes, I mean, when I say book, it was a story with
Sure, sure,
8 pages, but
sure.
for a 6-year-old,
But that's kind of
yes.
amazing for a
And
little
and
kid to be
and
like, I'm gonna find somebody because it wasn't like was it somebody in your family or
it was someone in my
okay.
family, but I paid them so
You
that they'd
paid
have to,
them.
I paid them a quarter. That's what my allowance
That's
was.
so cute. I love that.
And I wanted it to be professional.
Aw. Yeah.
So, and I felt that if I paid them, it would be professional, and they'd have to type exactly
Aw.
what I said, because I
Yeah,
couldn't read at the age of 6, so I had to
sure.
trust them. But I actually have many, books, as I call them, but they were little books that I bound. But
That
the
is
oldest one we could
so
find,
cute.
I was 6. So when I say this is really my passion, and actually when I was 10 years old, I tried to write my first novel. I had this incredible fifth grade teacher. Her name was Miss Mercer, and she
Aw.
knew I loved, and I recently found her. They
Aw.
thank the universe for the internet, because I was able to find her, and tell her the profound impact she had on my life. But I was 10 at the time, and she exempt me from some of the class projects so that I could try to write a novel because I wanted to. And I had a notebook like filled. I never finished the novel. I mean, I was 10 years old. It didn't pan out, but I do remember it. And I remember it was a love story. And actually, in my 40s, I ended up writing that book.
Oh,
And that book is coming out next March. But I tried to write it when I was 10 years old. And I did find her about a year or two ago. And she remembered me, which was
oh, that's so
incredible,
cute.
incredible. And
Yeah.
I got to thank her.
Yeah. So yeah, I was curious in looking at your website that you talked about being a PhD, and you particularly said is it's you have specialized in arts-based research. What is that? What does that mean?
So I was a sociologist doing like what sociologists traditionally do. For me, I was interviewing people about their lives, mostly women. I was interviewing women about their relationships, their identities, pop culture consumption. That was sort of my niche. I was always interested in women's lives and relationships. And I was interviewing women, and I was writing very traditional research articles that are published in academic journals, and I was presenting at professional conferences where you're only talking to your academic peers. And I
Sure.
started to feel like this seems like a complete waste of time because I'm actually learning really interesting things from girls and women about their lives. And I'm developing cumulative insights about how women see themselves and their relationships and their dreams and their hopes. But
Was the
these journal
research
articles,
on art? It was,
it wasn't. It was just on women's lives, and there was no art
oh,
involved at that time. And
oh, okay.
and what happened was I realized that basically the research was, in my mind, useless. I mean, no real women out in the world were ever going to read journal articles. I didn't even want
Mm,
to read the journal articles I was writing. That's how
yeah,
boring they were. And women's
right.
lives are not boring, but this format was. So I started doing research to see if there's other ways to present your work. And I stumbled upon something called arts-based research, which I did not invent. It already existed, but it immediately made sense to me. It's basically where researchers in any field, so sociology, psychology, health studies, they turn to the arts in order to either do or to represent their research. So some people use poetry, some people use fiction, some people use visual art. And it just immediately made sense to me that if I took what I was learning in my interviews and I put them in some sort of literary format, then people would be able to actually read it if they wanted to and relate to it. And so I started doing that in my nonfiction. I started using fiction, but then
Huh.
eventually I just completely crossed the line, and now I'm just writing fiction.
So did you already have your PhD by that point, or was
Oh
that part
yes,
of, okay,
I
okay,
did. I already have my PhD, which I got doing very, very traditional research,
okay.
which now I look at as pretty boring. I mean, honestly, I thought it was pretty boring then too. I just
Yeah.
didn't know there was an alternative.
Huh.
Um, Not the research itself, but the way you have to write it. These very
Yeah.
formulaic ways of writing that, like,
Sure.
basically nobody would really want to read unless it was your job. And
Yeah.
as a lifelong reader and someone who loves reading, I wanted to write things that people would enjoy reading, that they would elect to read, or at least
Yeah.
that's what you aspire to do.
Yeah. That's true. I mean, that's a good point. Yeah. Ho, ho, ho. We'd like to take a second and thank our sponsor for this episode of the podcast. It's the Hallmarkies Patreon.
Do you love Hallmarkies podcast, especially at Christmas?
Do you enjoy the holiday previews, recaps, interviews, and bonus episodes?
If the answer is yes, please consider supporting the Hallmarkies Patreon. We need your help to do what we do both during the Christmas season and all year round.
But not only do you help a podcast led by strong, independent women by becoming a Patreon, you get to become a part of the Hallmarkies family.
Starting at only $2 a month as a patron, you will have access to our Facebook Patreon group where we talk about the movies, shows, and more all year.
We also have many monthly patron watch-alongs with guests like Lacey Chabert, Natalie Hall, Paul Campbell, Mary Lou Henner, and more, giving their behind-the-scenes details of their films.
As a patron, you also have the chance to provide input into the podcast and even join us at different tiers.
So this Christmas season, spread some cheer to the Hallmarkies Patreon and become a member today. You won't regret it.
Go to patreon.com/hallmarkies to learn more.
That's patreon.com/hallmarkies. Because, yeah, most of those even as a critic, I find that sometimes for certain publications, they want things to feel more academic in tone, as opposed to like there's like two kinds of critics. There's at least often two kinds of critics. One type that comes from like a blogging background, and one type that comes from a journalism background. And the blogging background is for me, and that's what I connect with more. And like showing your personal connection to the work, showing how it moved you, kind of a thing. But the other people, they hate that, that people from the more journalism background, they're like, that's too subjective. It's too, it's they don't like it. And so you kind of have this battle back and forth. But I definitely know that when I can feel like sometimes frustrating if I'm writing for a site that wants that more academic tone. It's like, this is so boring, like why am I writing,
Yes.
about,
And honestly, as a
it's just
reader,
interesting.
I would prefer to hear your personal feelings about what you've read. I mean, it's always subjective anyway. How we feel about what we read is subjective anyway. So to try and dress it up like it's not, I think we just we lose that connection. I mean, some of the best reviews I've ever received from trades, they're so sterile. So they're great reviews.
It's true.
In the publishing world, they're considered great reviews, and I'm grateful for any kind of review, but they are very sterile. And I sort of an emotional response is always, to me, the best response, because that it actually meant something to the reader. It resonated, it hit a nerve, they genuinely enjoyed it. To me, that's so much better.
Like I've read some reviews where it's like, did the person even like or not like? I can hardly tell. Like they're spending so much time talking about I don't know, the nuts and bolts of whatever it is, that it's like, I get it. You think the cinematography was impressive. Did you like the movie?
Yes. Yes. I mean, I'm an avid movie goer as well. My husband and I go to an actual movie theater at least once a week, and we still see things on the big screen. I love movies. And I'm so often will hear people leaving talking about, they're analyzing it, which I understand. I'm a sociologist. I like to analyze things. But I can't tell, but did you like it? Sometimes people they think they were supposed to like it, they think it was smart. And I'm just more of a feelings kind of person. So I'm like, how did it make you feel? Did you enjoy it? Did you cry? Did you connect? Did you laugh?
Well, I'm really curious, especially with your research background, though, because the romance category is just taking over publishing right now. It's just absolutely huge. And I'm just curious, why do you think that is the case? Why do you think that it's having this moment? And I don't know, what do you think is resonating so strongly about romance right now in fiction?
I think, to me, what's so amazing about romance is, first of all, you're putting love into the world. You are literally putting love into the world. That is what romance is about. And to me, that's such a positive thing to do, especially in a world where we have so many serious problems and so much divisiveness and violence and trauma and all of these negative things that we all have to live in this world where we confront these things. And so it's not surprising to me that readers want an escape from that. And they want something that's filled with affection and love and kindness. And you find those kinds of stories in romance. So I think in some ways it's in direct proportion to things out in the real world, if you will, getting worse in some ways and just more negative and more toxic feeling, that people are looking for the antidote. And to me, love is always the antidote to negativity, on top of which I think it's really wonderful for women writers and women readers, because as a genre in general, romance is predominantly written by and for women. That's just who chooses to write it generally and who chooses to read it. And so to me, it's like taking women's experiences seriously, taking women's hopes, their dreams, their fantasies, all of those things seriously. And having grown up at a time where I feel like girls and women's hopes and dreams and fantasies were not taken seriously, by and large in the culture. I think that, and it's you look at someone like Taylor Swift, and obviously she's as famous can be and as successful as anyone can be. And you look at like how many millions of people are singing along at her concerts, and you like, what is it about her music? You don't even have to get into her as an artist, but like what you really have at the core is that her songs are about girls and women's feelings and experiences. In her case, mostly her own, but in ways that are obviously relatable to many, many people. And I think what she does for especially a lot of young listeners is she validates the fact that their stories matter, their feelings matter, their hopes matter, their fantasies matter. And I think when you've grown up in a culture where girls and women are constantly told those things don't matter,
Yeah.
that you seek out different kinds of media and entertainment. And so that's one of the reasons I think that romance is having this really much deserved moment. And it's fantastic because there's been so much bias against romance as a genre, which it still persists. In some ways, it's not seen as being as well written. It's not taken as seriously. There are grants that writers can apply for where the only genre excluded is romance. That's really incredible to me.
Yeah.
And to assume that the writing is, I mean, I can think of many, many romance novelists who I think are among the best novelists, period. They're just
Right.
gorgeous writers. They
Yeah.
happen to choose to write about love and relationships. And it's no coincidence to me that this genre that is dominated by women is also this genre that is saddled with this concept that it's not as good,
Yeah.
that it's not as literary. And I'll spend my whole life fighting against that. And I'm really grateful to all the readers out there who champion romance and who hold it up and say, I love these books, and this is why I love these stories. I love this writing. And I think that they're doing something really wonderful for the larger community of women, but also the larger community of artists by saying,
Yeah.
no, we think this is good and these stories matter to us.
Yeah, I completely agree. Very well said. I mean, people don't believe me. The romance category contributed to 2/3 of the overall gains in adult fiction. Two
Yes,
thirds.
yes,
Unit sales grew 40% in 2021. Like, that's
yes.
crazy.
Yes, and it's so
That's
interesting too, because
crazy.
you look at, we had a global pandemic,
Hmm.
obviously, and while people, basically mostly feel out of that now, that was a really horrific time when you
Yeah.
think back to lockdown and people dying and people suffering. I mean, it was a truly, truly terrible time. And what did people turn to? And what have
Yeah.
they been turning to since? Things that bring them joy and pleasure and escape. I
Yeah.
think that's fantastic. I mean,
Yeah.
I personally feel, sometimes I've been insulted for choosing to write romance, and especially
Yeah.
because I was fortunate. I had a very successful career as a nonfiction author, and so I had made a name in a very different area of publishing. And so I have been warned by people about the
Mm.
dangers of writing romance, which that just makes me want to go full throttle and do it even more because there is nothing better to put into the world than love. I mean, I
Yeah.
truly, truly believe that. And by and large, that is what romance novelists are trying to do. And that's
Yeah.
what their readers feel, and that's what they want.
Because people are looking for hope, and that's what romance can give you, is that they by necessity all end with a happily ever after. That and I just think that there's just so much to be discouraged about, that we need that hope. And I also completely agree with everything you're saying about the lack of quality content that's made for women. And what's just you just wonder when Hollywood in particular is going to wake up and realize that there's this huge underserved market. I mean, if Barbie didn't teach them that, I don't know what will. But
Yes.
uh you should look at something like Bridgerton. It had just the massive ratings, and you're just like, why isn't every studio making content like this? Why isn't everybody jumping on this bandwagon? and
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
it's so I did a whole rant on my other channel a month or so ago, that a lot of what we're getting, even in Bridgerton to a certain extent this last season, is stuff that's packaged to seem like it's a rom-com or seem like it's a romance, but it's actually not. They know that market's out there, or if it is, it's barely a romance. And so I go in to see it and I'm like, I'm so excited. This is going to be great. And then it's like, what? that was barely like the Fall Guy, for example. I
Hmm.
was really disappointed in that because it was sold on being this rom-com, and then the two are
Yes.
separated almost the entire movie. You're just like,
Yes.
what? Why? Like I have no. It was so annoying, and so yeah, I don't know when Hollywood is going to wake up and realize that they need to start making these like look at this market that's out there. They're
Yeah, it's
waiting.
incredible.
We're
And
waiting.
every time they make something, I mean, look at it ends with us right now. I mean, it doesn't
Yeah,
matter if you like the
it's
film or
true.
not. I mean, I know it's been controversial, but just look at the box
Yeah,
office.
no, it's
I mean,
true.
Hollywood is, if they're by the numbers,
Yeah,
follow the money trail. I mean,
yeah,
look at the number of readers. And also, readers who
yeah.
read romance read far more books than other readers. That's another
That's
thing
true.
to
That's a good
know. They
point. Yeah,
read more books per year, significantly more.
yeah,
So it's just their community is there. I mean, part of me just thinks I actually think romance is so powerful. I mean, I just truly think it's like a culture changer.
yeah,
I mean, I do believe that the stories that we tell, the images we put out, the narratives we put out in the world, they can change the culture in lots of different ways. And I think that romance can change the culture in lots of positive ways because you are putting love out. You are centering often women and girls' lives. You are being relationship centered, and healthy relationships impact everything in our society. I mean,
yeah.
people
That's
having
true.
models of healthy relationships is really important.
Yeah,
And there aren't always a lot of great models coming out of Hollywood of what healthy relationships actually could look like and could feel like and what partnership looks like and feels
yeah.
like. And all of these things are
You're
important. And
right.
just what you said earlier, hope. I mean, we have to have hope in our lives. And individually and collectively as a society, there has to be hope for positivity, for goodness, for good things to happen. And so this is a source where we get that. And so I actually think that romance as a genre is extremely powerful. I
Yeah,
think it's a huge moneymaker for the publishing
yeah,
industry. It has the potential to be so for Hollywood. And so part of me, am a little cynical and I do wonder, like, what are they so afraid of? Why are they not
yeah.
just going for it?
I agree.
Um, you
I
know,
completely agree.
makes
Yeah,
you wonder.
absolutely. Yeah. Today's episode of the podcast is sponsored by Acorns. Investing can feel intimidating, and most people don't know where to start. I remember when I first started investing, it was very overwhelming. That's where Acorns comes in. Acorns makes it easy to start automatically saving and investing in your future. Acorns is an app that recommends an expert built portfolio that fits you and your money goals, and you don't need a lot of money or expertise to invest with them. In fact, you can get started with Acorns with just your spare change. Head to acorns.com/hallmarkies or download the Acorns app. Start saving and investing for your future today. This is a paid, non-client endorsement. Compensation provides incentive to positively promote Acorns. Investing involves risk. Acorns Advisors LLC, an SEC-registered investment advisor. View important disclosures at acorns.com/hallmarkies. Head over to acorns.com/hallmarkies or download the Acorns app to start saving and investing for your future today. That's acorns.com/hallmarkies. So I'm curious about your sort of process for writing. Would you consider yourself a pantser or a plotter?
Well, okay. So I get asked that question all the time, and I'm horrible because I always give different answers because the question is too binary. So
Uh-huh.
I mean, I every book is different. I mean, at this point, I've written, they're not all published yet, but I've written about 20 novels, and I can honestly say that no two are the same.
Uh-huh.
Um, I do always have the general plot in my mind. So I know the beginning, the middle, and the end. Sometimes I know that in great detail, sometimes I don't. I always know the characters really well, but I'm definitely open to where things go. There are scenes in every single one of my novels that were not planned. And they're my favorite usually.
Uh-huh.
And often they're the ones that lead something to becoming a trilogy or a series or something bigger. So I'm a little bit of both. Like I do sit down with a plan. I have an idea. I know what the book is about. I know who the main characters are. I know some big things that are going to happen, but I am very much open to the moments. I don't write my novels in order. I write them as
Oh,
scenes. completely out of order, and then I stitch them together in the end. And I always sort of do this, fingers crossed, like that. It's a book. It's the right number of words. It's the right number of pages.
Yeah.
But so yeah, all of my books, I have a file, an electronic file for each book. And instead of saying things like chapter 1, chapter 2, because I don't know what chapter any scene is going to be, it
Oh,
will
that's
say
interesting.
cake scene, wedding scene, this scene. It's all scenes.
Uh-huh.
And I stitch them together. And some I actually have written mostly in order, but most of them not. I have
Hmm.
one that I wrote complete opposite order. I
Oh,
started with
wow.
the last scene, I ended with the first scene. And I write every day. That's the other thing about my writing process. I write every single day. I don't write all day every day, but I write weekends, holidays, vacations. Last year, I wrote 363 days. The 2 days I didn't write, I was in the emergency room having surgery. So I had no choice.
That's
Um,
amazing.
but I do, I write every day. Like I said,
Yeah.
not all day, every day, but even if it's just in the morning for an hour, to me, it's the way some people talk about exercise. I'm
Uh-huh.
not an exercise person. Like I'll do it like if I have to, but I'm just not a
Right.
person who's gonna love it and enjoy it. But I know people who like they don't feel good if they don't
Right.
exercise or go for a run. That's how I feel about writing. So I write every day. That's how the magic happens too, I think. I think if you have the discipline to do it, like when you're not necessarily inspired, it's not like I wake up every day inspired. I mean, some days I don't know what's going to happen next. Some days it's a difficult scene, either emotionally or I just haven't figured out how to write it. Um, but if I sit in the chair and force myself, even if I end up with very few words, even if it's not on paper what looks like a productive day, I know that that part of the process is productive because the act of me sitting there every day and working through it buys me the days where it's flowing and I forget to have lunch and I'm like, oh my God, it's nighttime. Oh,
Yeah.
my family's on their own. I'm still busy. So I'm a big believer in the discipline of writing. A lot of people talk about like talent and inspiration and all of that. And I think that's all very romantic, but I think that anyone who wants to write, it's just about the discipline and that teaches you the craft and brings you the magic.
Yeah. I love that. That's very inspiring. So you had written nonfiction. How did you get that first fiction? How did you get people to take you seriously and really like get that
Well,
first book published?
I don't know if they took me seriously, but I'll tell you how I got it published. So my debut novel, which came out, and I think around 2011, it was called Low Fat Love. And I wrote it. My husband, then boyfriend, was like, you have to publish this. And I had no relationships in trade publishing. All my relationships were in academic publishing.
Yeah,
And I
very
had a really
different.
good career. I mean, I had some bestsellers, like books that have been translated around the world, but it's actually a completely different world. So
Yeah.
I might as well have been, a non-published author. So I looked into everything. I looked into getting an agent. I looked into self-publishing. And my husband kept saying, you have bridges you can build with the publishers you know. And I'm like, I don't. None of them publish fiction. Like they just don't. And he was like, I'm telling you, there are bridges you can build. Honestly, I found him just annoying at the time. I thought he was just like an uninformed person who was
Yeah.
badgering me. But I did look into self-publishing, and I'm not opposed to self-publishing at all, but it was not my first choice. I wanted it to be published by a publisher if I could. I looked into getting an agent. I had a lot of crickets, a lot of rejections. I had a couple who were interested, didn't work out. And I just kept thinking about what my husband was saying. And so I ended up pitching my first novel to two academic publishers who had never published fiction before. One of them thought about it quite a bit. I turned it down. Later told me he regretted it though, which I thought was very kind. I pitched it to a different publisher who now is a very good friend of mine. I didn't know this at the time, but it turns out that this guy who owns this publishing house is a playwright and very involved in community theater. So he loves the idea of art and literary work. And I pitched him the idea of my novel as the launch of a series of academics who have written literary works. And I eventually sold him on the idea. And we called it the Social Fiction Series. And the idea that it was all fiction influenced by social research or social concerns. And he gave me a contract to publish 2 books, mine, and I could pick one other book. The first day that we put out a call for submissions, I had thousands of applicants. It was incredible. Like we thought we'd have like maybe crickets, maybe nothing.
Right.
It
Yeah.
turns out that every scholar in the world has a novel or a play or a poetry collection like in their drawer, and
Yeah.
they too did not know how to publish it. So
That's so funny. I
it
love
was
that.
like this was actually a huge turning point in my life.
Yeah.
I don't like to say this on air where it's being recorded because I have to give my husband credit. And at the time, I gave him a really hard time about it. But we ended up publishing. I was editor for that series for 10 years. We published 45 books.
Oh
It
my
was the
gosh.
publisher's most successful series of all time. There were books that were translated around the world that won awards. My debut novel, Low Fat Love, was the most successful book the publisher ever published, which we did not expect. I mean, I did not expect to sell even 2 copies of it. That book has now been published 4 times, and I actually, this is a fluke that I have this sitting here. It was just published in Chinese a week ago. This book came out in 2011, and it's still,
Nice.
things are still happening. It was published in Chinese about a week ago. And it was just incredible. And I stepped down from the series. We could have kept going. I stepped down from editing it and closed the series because I wanted to move into trade publishing for my fiction. And it was just too much work. It was too much to do. But I was really, really proud of that series. I was proud of the books. That debut novel of mine, Low Fat Love, it is my least favorite of my novels. So for folks listening thinking, oh, well, maybe I'll read that, you're more than welcome to, but it's not the one I would recommend. I didn't know what I was doing back then. I did a few years ago put out a 10th anniversary edition, which I self-published. I got the rights to the book from the publisher, and I rewrote it because I'm a better writer now. I rewrote it and I put out Low Fat Love 10th anniversary edition. Which I am proud of, but that being said, it's still not one of my favorite of my novels. But that is how I started in publishing. And so I just want to say for anyone out there listening who has any sort of creative dream, that you just have to have like vision and chutzpah. And if the traditional path or whatever idea you had in mind is not working for you, sometimes there's a workaround. Sometimes we're not just creative in our work, but we're creative in how we share our work. And so, I never could have predicted where I'd end up now. And I have a wonderful publisher for my fiction who, is a traditional trade publisher, and we have an incredible distributor and all those kinds of things, which I did not have at the time. But I don't regret a minute of that journey. I mean, I had a blast, and I had a blast working with other authors too and helping them publish their creative works.
That's a great story. I love the idea of all these PhDs that are like, whoa, yes, I could finally sell that novel.
Oh my God. There was one. Oh, this is like one of my favorites I ever published. The book is called October Birds. The author, her name is Jessica Smart Gullion. I don't remember the year we published it, but like around 2014. Well, she had been a healthcare worker. She worked in whatever they call the people who are develop plans to respond to pandemics.
Oh, wow.
So she had worked in that for years in Texas, and she was
She's
one of the
busy.
people that came up with the plan for how Texas would respond if there ever was a pandemic. She wrote a novel about it. We published the novel in something like 2014. And then you all know what happened in 2020. People thought she was a prophet. People read this book, literally. I mean, we started getting emails like, this is like prophecy. And she's like, no, this is what happens when someone who's done research on a topic and has experience in the job. It's the same thing. Like if you've experienced alcoholism or abuse and you write a book about that, there will be an authenticity to it. So in any event, in 2020, people started rereading her book again, and they were like amazed. And the publisher actually was giving away nonfiction research, anything pandemic related that could help. A lot of publishers did that during the pandemic that could help researchers. And as a part of giving away research, they also gave away her novel. It's just like,
great.
you can never plan these things in a million years. So
yeah. That's great. Well, so you have After the Red Carpet coming out. Now, this is a sequel, correct?
Yes. So
Yes.
the first book is The Location Shoot. And the second book is After the Red Carpet.
Yeah. Now
And
I
I'll just
have
tell you
I have
secretly, it's a trilogy. There's one
oh,
more coming out.
okay. I haven't read The Location Shoot, so I will tell the listeners that you do not have to have read the one to understand or appreciate. It stands alone, I think, well, pretty
Thank
well.
you.
Yeah. But I'm curious about this book because there's not that many romance novels about a married couple. Was that a challenge?
Yeah, I mean, it's so interesting to me because you're right, there absolutely aren't. And a lot of romance novels actually end with, the engagement, the proposal, the wedding, which is very reminiscent of childhood fairy tales that often
Sure,
also
yeah.
end with the engagement or the wedding. And it's so interesting to me because in real life, I hope that's not the end of romance. I mean, I kind of think it's the beginning. I mean, relationships go through different phases. So, relationships change,
Yeah.
people change. It's not the same when you have your first kiss as it is when you've been married for 20 years. But that being said, romance does not actually end with the wedding. That is supposed to signify the beginning of a
Yeah.
lifelong romance. And so I think it's a missed opportunity. I think there's this like white space out there where we don't have a lot of narratives about romance for
Yeah.
married couples or romance for older couples. It's so often about finding love. And I think that
Mm.
there's so much that happens when two people try to meld their lives and become partners to one another. And you each will inevitably grow and change because we all do as we age. How does that work? Like how do you take two lives and create a life together? And so I'm just fascinated by that. And I am a married person who will be celebrating my 15th anniversary. And romance didn't end the day we got married. So that's to me sort of when the relationship really begins.
Yeah. I think that part of the problem, at least in the movies, that it tends to happen is they just don't know what conflict. I think the conflict is the hardest part because you don't want often they'll have them break up in the sequel to whatever, and that sucks. We don't want that. We don't like that. Or they have them have a baby. And usually, at least in movies, that's just not very like entertaining.
Entertaining.
It's just not, it usually does not work. And so it's very tough. I mean, that's why there's so few romantic comedy sequels that are good. Very, very,
Yes.
very few. Very
It's
few.
absolutely true. It's absolutely true. And for me, I mean, a lot of romance novelists are plot centered. So obviously the
Mm,
relationships are central, they're writing romance, but a lot of them are also plot centered. And generally speaking, my books are much more relationship driven than they are
mm,
plot driven.
mm-hmm.
So I do have some books where something, quote unquote, big happens. So, there's a kidnapping or there's an accident. Those things are usually resolved very quickly in my books, though. They're usually not the heart of the book. When I have those kinds of events happen, it's
Mm-hmm.
always so that the couple can learn more about each other and their relationship. It's not a plot, it's a plot device. My books are always about relationships. They're about the relationships we have with ourselves and the relationships we have with our partners, and then usually other relationships such as friendships and those sorts of things as well. So for me, I think it was a little easier to sort of walk into this second phase of these characters' story because I knew there aren't going to be huge plot points. That doesn't mean there's no plot, but it's going to be much more relationship centered. My books, some have more conflict than others, but again, they tend not to be conflict heavy. And that's partly too, because I try to write characters who really treat each other well. So usually if they're suffering at all, they're sort of doing it to themselves, but they're not treating each other badly. I'm not a huge fan of people who don't treat each other well, but then you still want to root for them to end up together. I don't love that for me as a storyteller, telling that kind of
Mm-hmm.
story. So I just tend to have less conflict in my book. So it made it easier for me to dive
Mm-hmm.
into this second phase. But I will tell you one thing, because you asked earlier about my writing process, and I told you, I write scenes out of order. There's always something unplanned. And in the location shoot, I did have a really sort of strong plot in my mind down to the last line of the book. Like I really just knew what it was going to be. And I wrote the whole book. I actually wrote it during the lockdown. It was a lockdown project. I wanted to escape to somewhere joyful. So I wrote a book that takes place on a film set in Sweden, and it's a love story. So it's my complete lockdown fantasy. It was like my escape of joy during the lockdown. And I wrote the whole book and I reread it after I stitched it together. And I felt there were a couple of moments where I was going from plot point to plot point, and like the story just wasn't breathing. Like you just needed to give the reader a breath. And so I went back and I added two scenes, which are now two of my favorite scenes in the location shoot. One of those scenes is a scene where Ella and Finn, the main couple, take a bubble bath together, a candlelit bubble bath. It's very romantic, but they talk about their dreams for the future. And it really is just their dreams of like getting married and having kids and what their kids' names would be. And it's just that kind of conversation you have when you're very much in the falling in love, lust phase of a relationship and you think this person's the one. And I'm so glad I added that scene because like 2 days after finishing that book, I really wanted to go back and write more about these characters. And that was how I came up with a story for After the Red Carpet. I was like, let's see if what they said comes true. Mm-hmm. These were their dreams. These were their fantasies. And for readers who have read both books, then they do get to see like, well, how did it pan out? Did that come true? And I will just say, and their dreams do come true, although not always in the way that we think, because that's what happens in life, that, you know, things don't necessarily happen the way we think, even when we get what we want. But I actually really loved writing the After the Red Carpet because it's so relationship centered. And for me, it's just like this very cozy kind of comfort read where you get into these nuts and bolts of figuring out a life together. And I had fun, like being less concerned with like wrapping up big plot points and just being more concerned with just watching these people build their life together.
Were you concerned with Finn being the movie star and Ella being the partner, the wife? Were you concerned about her being like too needy of a character? Was that hard to find that balance?
Well, she's a philosopher. So she has a career, but she spends her life as an author. So she doesn't have a job to go to per se, but she is an author. She is a philosopher.
But he's more like famous, more like
yes,
yeah.
Yes. And he's a huge movie star. He's like that, dreamy, hunky, he's my fantasy during the lockdown. So you can imagine.
Yeah.
In the first book, there is a breakup, and she does not want to live in his world, and she is afraid of giving herself to him. And so in the second book, that sort of shifts. And After the Red Carpet, that dynamic shifts where he is trying basically to make everything perfect for her. And in her words, to kind of Cinderella her because he doesn't want to lose her again. But really, she is a strong person who has strong ideas, and she wants to retain her own identity, but she also wants to be in love and have this like magnificent, wonderful, sexy relationship with this guy that she's crazy about. So there is that sort of, and that's another thing too. Like I think about, I mean, I've always had a career and I've also always had a relationship. And I say always, like before my husband, I had multiple, serious relationships. And when I didn't, I, hoped I would at some point. So I'm definitely a person in love with love. And I think that is a real struggle. Like, how do you build a life with someone, and how do you like really love someone with your whole heart? While also retaining who you are, while also retaining your identity, while also being your own person out in the world. And I think because of Finn's Hollywood world, it made it, for me, fun to have this like fantasy level of what would those specific struggles be like? Because they're different than the struggles I would have, right? I mean, we're more, it's a struggle like, well, who's going to go to the grocery store? It's not what mansion are we going to live in, and are the paparazzi going to be following us? But at the core, I think that the challenges are really the same. Like, how do you merge your lives? How do you create a home together? How do you retain your identity? And Ella changes over the course of the two books. I mean, in the second book, and After the Red Carpet, she is a person who just totally wants to love with her whole heart, but it's not where she started. And I will tell you the third book, I can't share the title yet because sometimes publishers change those. So until we have a cover, I'm not allowed to. But the third book, which comes out next September, it takes place 30 years after the location shoot. So you will get in total 31 years of these characters. So you will see the whole narrative, the whole arc of their love story, but also who they are and who they are at different times in their love story.
That's really, really cool. Well, I think that if people are looking for a married romance, I think that they will find a lot to enjoy. We'd like to take a second and thank our sponsor for this episode of the podcast. It's Harper's Road Press and New York Times bestselling author Terry Wilson's new book, Once Upon a Royal Christmas. This charming Christmas royal romance will be the perfect escapism for this holiday season. Gracie Clark, who spends most of her time playing a princess at children's parties, might just have the Christmas of her lifetime this year. She's won a contest, the opportunity to star in Prince Nicholas of San Glycera's annual Ice Village festivities, and accompany the royal family to holiday events. Prince Nicholas, however, isn't as excited. An absolutely wonderful fairy tale escape from Terry Wilson that will have you believing in Christmas magic. You can pick up Once Upon a Royal Christmas anywhere where you shop for books or use the affiliate link below. That's Once Upon a Royal Christmas. We know you'll love it. Well, we like to end our interviews with some fun get to know you questions. And the first question is, what is the best ice cream flavor?
Oh, mint chocolate chip.
Mm-hmm. What's your favorite color?
Black.
Aha. Okay, good. What music are you into?
Tori Amos is my all-time favorite singer. She's from the 90s, but she still makes music for folks who don't know.
Yeah. That's good. What's your go-to date night food?
Well, my husband and I don't agree on food, so we go to compromise restaurants.
Okay.
And at the compromise restaurants, I will usually get something like duck, and he will get fish. He only eats seafood. So, and I make seafood at home all the time. So a date night to me is something I don't make at home.
Yeah, that makes sense. Well, that's very good example of marriage right there. Like,
Yes. Compromise.
Yeah. Okay, what is your favorite go-to date night activity if you're going out?
Movies. We're movie people.
Yeah.
We love storytelling.
Good choice. Okay, what do you like better, dogs or cats?
Dogs. I'm a dog person. I have 2 dogs, and I'm allergic to cats.
Yeah, same. All right, which do you like better, beaches or mountains?
Beaches. I live in Kennebunk, Maine. My house is like less than 2 miles from the beach. And I used to be a city person. We were from Boston, and I sort of made my husband pick up and move so I could be closer to the water.
Oh, jealous there. Yeah, I love the beach as well. What is your favorite holiday to celebrate?
Oh, that is a tough one, but I would actually pick my daughter's birthday is my holiday to celebrate.
That's cute. I like that. Okay, last question. What's your favorite Hallmark or romantic movie?
I love the Christmas movies. I watch them year round. I cannot just pick one of the Christmas movies. I literally DVR them and I have them all year. My husband does not love them, I have to say. So I start in early November, like they're coming.
Oh, yeah.
Like I make him watch them with me, even though it's not his thing. I watch them year round. If I'm having a bad day or a really good day, or my husband's out of town, that's what comes on.
Same. I agree. Well, very good. You did it. You answered all the questions. Thank you so much for coming to talk with us.
Thank you. Really so much fun. And thank you for all your kind words. I really appreciate it.
And we'll have a link to people who want, we'll have an affiliate link in the description for the book. And when does it come out?
It's out. It came out September 3rd.
Great.
So it just came out.
Great. If people want to follow you on social media, anything like that, do you have anything like that?
I do. If they go to my website, which is patricialeavy.com, Leavy, there are links. I'm on Facebook, Instagram, and whatever they're calling Twitter or X
Yeah, I
these
refuse.
days.
I will
And I
not
do
call it
respond to
X.
people's messages on Instagram and Facebook.
Yeah, very good. Very good. All right, great. Thanks so much. I'd like to thank Patricia for coming on the podcast. This was so much fun. I just thought she had so many interesting things to say. We had a great discussion. Hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. And make sure you check out the link in the affiliate. Make sure you check out the affiliate link in the description. And you can find me at Rachel's Reviews, all of our social media, iTunes, YouTube, and on Rotten Tomatoes and on Goodreads. Check that out. Also, make sure you're following the podcast, the Hallmarkies Pod, Hallmarkies Podcast, all of our social media. And if you are listening on iTunes, please leave your ratings and reviews. That really, really helps us a lot, especially going into this holiday season. And if you are watching on YouTube, please give the video a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel. We sure appreciate that. Most of our viewers on YouTube are not subscribers. So if you're in that camp, please, please, please subscribe. It really, really helps us a lot. And check out the Patreon group. That's the biggest way you can support us. And we try to make it well worth your while. And the merch store, there's lots of fun items at the merch store. And thanks so much again to Patricia, and we'll talk to you later. Bye.